Hello, and welcome to HAI at Work's webinar, what you might or should have, why you might or should have drones in your future. We appreciate that you joined us today. We will get started in about a minute. We like to give people time to join us. So we'll get started in about 60 seconds. Let's go ahead and launch a poll real quick while we're waiting to join. Since we are talking about UASs today and whether or not you integrated them into your business and why you should, let's see how many of you have already done that. We'll leave that up for just another 10 or 15 seconds or so. It looks like the majority of the people who have responded have already incorporated aircraft. Actually, it's split pretty evenly right now. Yes and no. People are intending to do it, and some people are still researching it. So we hope that that's why you came to join us today. I'll share the results here with everybody. Looks like a real even match there. Almost, well, it is dead even. So. Okay, well, hey, we appreciate that you took time out of your busy schedule to join us. We're not going to hold things up too much longer. Today's video will be, or today's presentation will include a recorded video presentation. We have a lot of great speakers who are industry professionals, and it was going to be difficult to try to get them all together at the same time. And so we pre-recorded this. That said, we do have some of the panelists who have volunteered their time to come back, and they will be answering questions after the presentation is over. So let's go ahead and get started and introduce everybody. Speaker today, we'll start out with Jim Viola, the president and CEO of HAI. Dr. Scott Burgess, professor of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and he is also the special advisor to the HAI Board of Directors for UAS and the UAS Working Group Chair for us. Mark Colburn, Senior Corporal, Dallas Police Department Reserve, and he's also on the FAA's Drone Advisory Committee. Jonathan Daniels, CEO of Praxis Aerospace Concepts International. Mark Gibson, President and CEO of Timberland Helicopters Incorporated. Tombow Jones, Director, Virginia Tech's Mid-Atlantic Aviation Partnership, which is an FAA-designated UAS test site. There's a lot going on here in Virginia. And Nate Roby, Manager of Unmanned Aircraft Systems for Dominion Energy. As I mentioned, we will have a Q&A session. This is a very interactive webinar. We do encourage you to ask questions. These guys have a lot of experience and are willing to share every part of what's gone on as they integrated aircraft into their projects. Please use the question module that's either on the bottom or the side of your screen. We will bring the questions up internally, and we will answer as many of them as we have time for following the presentations. We will do our best to answer them all, but we may not be able to get to everything. This presentation is being recorded. We will be getting the video out to you fairly soon, quickly as possible after the fact. It may take tomorrow or even into Monday, now Tuesday, probably for the holiday week. We encourage you to share it with people that you think might be interested in watching it. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Jim Viola, President and CEO of HAI.
All right, thanks, Dan. I think since I took over HAI last year, one of my primary talking points has been how rotorcraft industry is in the best position to take advantage of the coming evolution of the advanced air mobility. Of course, right now and today, we're going to be focused on UAS, but that is what's coming. It's another module of the transportation. So our pilots today that are flying helicopters, flying this airspace, that our manufacturers are the ones right now that are making those new aircraft that to meet these future demands of transportation and the delivery services. So I think it makes sense, and I've been trying to say that it makes sense that the operators out there today really embrace the technology so that you are fully prepared for the next stages of the advanced air mobility. And no one is asking you to give up your current helicopter, and that, you know, just as helicopters have evolved over the years from, you know, when they first took flight to all the different missions, the variety of missions that they do, it seems like it makes sense as we integrate the UAS into our existing businesses out there. It's going to make that business even more versatile and can even save you and your customers money. So today's webinar features 5 industry experts who have already incorporated UAS into their business models. Our moderator, Dr. Scott Burgess, as Dan said, is a special advisor to the board of directors here for us to make sure that we continually help with that integration from helicopters to another vertical flight tool that has been coming into our toolbox. So they are here to share the benefits that they've experienced, as well as areas where things did not go quite the way they had hoped or planned. The fact that they are willing to share everything that they've learned, I think shows that they care about you being ready and that they agree that the integration of UAS aircraft is a smart move. The webinar, as Dan said, was recorded earlier just so we can get all these great people together for you for this next hour. And I got to look at the video yesterday. I just want you to listen to some of the key words that I heard from some of these great speakers. I know Mark was talking about, you know, shaking the good idea tree, you know, and how this is more than just another good idea, one of those that comes up, but this is something that actually adds some substance to his business. You know, and it's, you know, some have thought maybe it was a new shiny object that was coming around the corner. But I think now more so people are realizing, yeah, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of areas that you can integrate with helicopters, with UAS, and then the future vertical flight stuff that's on the way in there. So new business cases are out there, better angles for doing it. You listen for some of this stuff today. Tombow Jones, I know I worked with the, on my FA side, with the Wing 135 certificate down in Virginia. So as we get to doing more and more of the beyond line of sight with the US, it's going to make it even more valuable. And then I think Jonathan does a really good job wrapping it up with the cautions and the challenges that are out there. So without that, Dan, let's get the video rolling and let Dr. Scott Burgess lead the panelists.
Okay, I appreciate that, Jim. Everybody knows the joys of Zoom. I think I've got the right screen sharing right now. I believe we're ready to go. So let's go ahead and see if this plays. Please let me know in the chat if it's not working.
Greetings, everybody. Hope you're having a great day. Welcome to HAI at Work. In this webinar, as you can see by the title, why should you consider adding drones to your fleet? We would like to come in with a very incredibly adept panel to give you some experiences, tell you a little bit about the integration piece that you may be missing, and help you get to that decision point to help your organization integrate UAS. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Again, Scott Burgess, I'm a professor at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and I'll just go ahead and kind of set the conditions for the rest of the panel in our discussion today. So why would you integrate drones? Well, as you can see here, the proliferation of drones into the aviation industry has really been on the uptake in the last few years. It's amazing to see the amount of commercial operations where drones are utilized. Drones or remotely piloted aircraft will really keep continuing to creep into the traditional helicopter mission sets. We're already seeing that happening, and you will see that today in this panel. The decision points for legacy operators, meaning those who currently use helicopters and have for decades, we're right there right now. That decision of integrating UAS, not replacing helicopters completely, but integrating those into your operation, that decision is here today. And that's really what we want to impart to you. to do that, I think it's a important element to give you where we are and where we're going with regard to the integration of UAS into the national airspace. So let's do that real quick. Briefly, remotely piloted aircraft, the FAA looks at that and their capabilities in this manner. It is a progressive move towards the ultimate urban air mobility passenger transport operations. And each of the things that are occurring in the industry with regard to the regulatory environment and the research that's going on, those things are all working in parallel. And you will actually hear some great examples of that today. Recently, there was a survey conducted by HAI, the foundational survey, that asked these questions of members and non-members. And you can see these mission sets that were, and this is all, brand new with this year. These mission sets were ones that the industry said they do, right? So an operator may do 4 or 5 of these things. So don't get wrapped around the numbers, more the volume at the top down to the bottom of companies that are picking up on these operations. So what? Well, how many of these can be done by a drone today? Let's look at that, and will be done by drones in the future. Current remotely piloted aircraft in yellow, these are mission sets that are being done right now by UAS, okay? And helicopter operators are saying they do the same thing. So there's your first indicator. The planned capabilities going down the road, if you remember that initial slide where we show the operational capabilities that are out there, those are planned currently in research. And if you look at the R&D that's going on with regard to things like passenger transportation in urban landscapes, that's happening right now. Aircraft are being developed. We look at the potential capabilities, and of course in blue, these are things that haven't really been, I guess, dove into significantly yet, but they are certainly those with potential to be able to utilize those passenger transport type aircraft. And I think it needs to be said that the mission sets are going to span small UAS under 55 pounds all the way up to the type certified or airworthiness certificated aircraft in the future. And John Daniels will probably address that a little bit as well. So what's the big deal here? Well, one of the reasons that we wanted to do this as well, that why factor, why should you, is kind of wrapped up in this slide as well, in that this was one of those foundational survey questions where the industry pretty much says, I don't plan on integrating UAS in the next year. However, if you looked at that previous slide, you know that may not be the best decision to make unless you just want to give up that mission set in your organization. So why don't we take a dive in and look at the examples of these types of mission sets that are out there that are being done right now, show you examples of integration happening, give you a little bit of the challenges and the benefits of those, and then kind of where we're going. So without further ado, I'd like to get into and talk about the panel. So this is a pretty distinguished panel. It's comprised of experts in their various fields. The collective experience on this panel, I think I added it all up, and it equates to over 150 years. So I think that's significant, okay? I'll introduce each of these gentlemen and preceding their short presentation. And all of us are rated in various platforms and or professional fields, have experiences with UAS into integrating into existing operations. All of these gentlemen, except for Nate Roby, are on the UAS working group for HAI. And each of them will, as I said, highlight an integration example for you. So let's start off on the commercial operations side. And we'll start off with Mark Gibson. So Mark has been actively involved in the transportation industry for 35 years now. He serves as the president and CEO of Timberland Helicopters based in Ashland, Oregon. Timberland provides manned helicopter charter and utility services, as well as unmanned aerial services, and Part 107 training geared to the utilities and public service sectors. Over the last 35 years, Mark has managed the Timberland aviation program, including parts 133, 135, and 137 operations. He's concurrently managing an affiliate that provides dedicated 24-hour aided and unaided helicopter air ambulance services. He also serves as a charter member of the Northwest Association of Aeromedical Responders. He's participated in several HAI committees and chairing several, and was our actual first chairman for the HAI then committee, UAS committee. So Mark, if you turn your camera on and you have the floor.
Okay, thanks a lot, Scott. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. As mentioned, we've been in the helicopter business for about 35 years. We operated various segments, EMS, we do fire, fish and wildlife, power line and pipeline patrol work, and then as mentioned, Part 107. It was about 5 years ago, I guess, that we decided to move into the UAS arena. And really it was more out of the vision that we've got to do this because it's going to happen. So we got to make something move forward. So some of the integration examples that I have, some of which we as a company have moved into, and some of which are just out there, what I see as opportunities: power line, pipeline, other utility patrol work. You'll hear a little bit more about that later on in one of the other presentations, but that's a key area, I think, that is definitely emerging, and it's something that we currently provide in manned aircraft. A lot of potential work there for emergency outages, patrols, storm damage. Structure inspection is probably where we get the majority of our UAS operations, looking for maybe potentially damaged components, hardware issues. Our first project was finding part numbers on suspect hardware on tower structures. Law enforcement, search and rescue, a lot of that functionality out there today. Land and facilities, plant facility surveys, those types of things that are certainly probably more efficient with a UAS. Solar farms is an area that we never really delved into in terms of manned aircraft, but it's a great market for UAS currently. Same thing with wind farms, turbine inspections, nacelle inspections. Those types of things are a pretty good area for small UAS. And then external load. We've done a fair amount of external load work, basically doing line patrol, or not line patrol, but line pulls, maybe over a short section of a river, a highway, an area that really doesn't make a lot of sense to use a helicopter, but it's more efficient and frankly safer than shooting a brass weight across a river, for example. And then I throw in there Part 107 training, because that's something that we do, but we found it a huge advantage as a helicopter company with licensed pilots, licensed instructors, to be able to teach Part 107 with maybe a little bit more experience and background in aviation to some of these commercial entities. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges that we ran into in integration was really determining those areas of potential market for us. And we used to have a chief pilot, and he was always saying, well, somebody's shaking the good idea tree again. And his points were well taken in that it's great to brainstorm, but early on, since we really didn't have a focus, we just knew we wanted to get into UAS. Every time a new product came out or a new idea came out, we were guilty of, well, we've got to buy that. Let's do that. Let's move forward. Let's see what we can do. So we ended up with a whole building full of UAS products that frankly, we probably didn't really need. But one of the things that we were guilty of was when you're used to buying components for aircraft, and then you look at the relatively inexpensive cost of UAS operations, it was pretty easy to sort of justify those things. So we really kind of had to step back and say, okay, what is our niche market? And I think that's something that everybody really needs to look at is what do we do now? What do we do well at? Maybe that's a good starting point to break into UAS. What could really enhance your current operation? And then from there, maybe move forward into potential new markets, things that you've got that aviation background, but maybe it's not the type of thing that you currently do with helicopters. Next slide, please. So in terms of operations, one of the first roadblocks, not really a roadblock, but mistakes that we made was we weren't treating small UAS as real aircraft. They were just sort of incidental. Let's give this a try. And we really learned a lesson. We crashed a UAS and nobody was injured. We didn't damage anything other than completely destroyed the UAS. But that's when we stepped back and said, we really need to look at this as just another segment of our manned aviation program. And so we developed a much better training program for our pilots. We developed risk assessments prior and afterwards when we would do a debrief after a flight. We utilized maintenance programs. Most of these small UAS companies have a maintenance program. Some of them have actual ADs and directives, real robust programs. And then we developed a good QA program really to ensure that we're providing what it is that the customer really is looking for as an end result. I mean, oftentimes customers may tell you what they want, but they maybe don't recognize, since UAS may be new to them, what it is they actually want as that end result. So we try to always do a really good debrief. So bottom line is, I mean, what we really tried to do was take this entire UAS program and just say, okay, this is just another part of our company. We're going to integrate all the pilots, the mechanics, everybody's sort of really going to be a part in what goes on. And it's actually turned out to be a pretty good program. I think we're still on the edge of where UAS is going, but frankly, I think as manned helicopter operators, we have to recognize that yes, indeed, we're going to lose a little bit of business to UAS. So it makes a whole lot of sense to sort of encapsulate that, take that on up front and move forward. So thank you, Scott.
Okay. Thank you, Mark Gibson. And I'd like to go ahead and go to the next panelist, and that will be another Mark Colborn. So Mark recently retired after 34 years of service with the Dallas Police Department. He continues to serve as an unpaid retired reserve officer on active status and helping to stand up a UAS program for their department. Mark also retired from the Texas Army National Guard as a UH-60 Lima Blackhawk pilot. He was also a standardization instructor pilot, SIP, and a safety officer. Mark has logged over 13,000 hours in helicopters and airplanes in over 40 years of flying. Mark serves as an industry representative on the FAA Drone Advisory Committee. He is also serving with the United States Helicopter Safety Analysis Team and recently became a FAST Team representative drone pro. So, Mark, if you turn your camera on, please, and you have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. First of all, what I'd like to say is that in government, nothing ever happens fast, and especially in a bureaucracy like a police department. That is definitely true. And Scott, if you could go to the next slide. Okay, thank you. Yeah, we began the process of trying to adopt a UAS, bring UAS into our department back in 2015. And my idea was to try to get the fire department involved because, as everybody knows, everybody loves the fire department and, they're not too keen on the police. So we figured, well, if we could get the fire department involved in this, we could get better community
involvement in buy-in. So we worked with a special operations chief over there. Well, he was over special operations, and he was really gung-ho to get this thing going. And we had several companies come out and give us demonstrations. And the problem was we were working real hard. I did an SOP for the department, and counterpart fireman over on the fire side, he did an MOP, and we presented that to the up the chain. And then this deputy chief who was over special operations got transferred, and the guy they put in his place really was not interested, and that kind of died at that point. And then so it kind of fizzled out, and we were looking for, not to replace our helicopters, but basically just as a supplement. We wanted to bring UAS in. And then in 2016, we had a mayor who was not too fond of us, and he tried to slash our retirement benefits, and this caused a huge, massive set of retirements from the department. Up to almost 500 people within a year retired. And then with all the anti-police movement and sentiment that was going on at the same time, it really caused a shortage of sworn personnel. And I knew then, I said, well, at this point, I had no hope that we were going to get a UAS unit. And even during that period of time, we had a couple of retirements from the helicopter unit, and they weren't even replacing those individuals. Next slide, please. And let's see. Then we had the events of July 7th, 2016, where we lost 5 police officers downtown to a active shooter during a BLM protest. And that kind of, I don't know, it changed a lot. It changed a lot of things in our city after that. We, at the time when we were flying over, I was flying over that incident that night, and we did not even have a working camera in the helicopter. All we had was the night sun, and we had absolutely no idea what was going on. I was flying between buildings. It was just absolutely crazy. And the department recognized this, and they finally managed to get some grant money to buy some new cameras, some moving map equipment, and really get us kind of into the 21st century. And so at that point, the need for UAS kind of was put on the back burner. And we, then as more and more protests started happening within the city, and the police movement, the anti-police movement got even bigger, it got to the point to where we were having almost 2 or 3 protests a day in some instances during the summer. And we had a lot of call for, hey, let's try to figure out another way to augment our helicopter service, because we're wearing out our helicopters. So they really kind of wanted us to come up with a way we could cover these large public events and protests, and use for static versus dynamic events. And as we all know, it's an aerial UASs are an aerial camera platform and can supplement helicopter operations. And our goal now is to use, on these protests, whenever we can, to use a UAS, and then maybe have the helicopter for a while, and then when they have to go for gas, we send the UAS up. It's a safe and efficient aerial observation platform, and we're also looking at it as a de-escalation technique too, for transparency and increased officer safety. And so we, after 7/7, we took this proposal down to the city council, and they really liked the idea. And we had a deputy chief, or an assistant chief at the time, who used to be in a helicopter unit. I worked with him for 5 years, and he was real gung-ho on this. And then he got transferred, and then at that time we got these new cameras. So like I say, that got put on the back burner. But here recently, because of all the the ongoing effects of all these protests and everything, we finally are beginning to bring up our recruiting efforts within the department. And so
they're looking at, they gave us back at the beginning of the year, they said, hey, let's get this thing going because we really need an additional service to kind of help out the helicopter unit because they're just getting hammered on all these things. So next slide, please. So like I say, back around the beginning of the year, the helicopter unit was renamed the aviation unit. And we're going to have two squads. We're going to have a helicopter squad and a UAS squad, and they're both going to be commanded by a sergeant. And from the very beginning, my idea and our idea behind this whole thing was that, hey, the aviation unit would be in charge of whatever program that we start. And we applied for a blanket COA, and we also got a jurisdictional COA, but it's issued to the city of Dallas. So we can include any other department within the city who wants to do UAS type work, but they're going to have to go through us and coordinate through us. And now we've got the fire department really interested. Our operations are co-located at the new City of Dallas hangar that they built for us out at Dallas Executive Airport. So our SWAT unit is very interested in using UAS for clearing buildings, especially on warrant entries, and also on barricaded people. They can send in, the biggest problem they have is they have these little tracked robots that they can send into the house, but most criminals don't keep a very tidy house. So they have, like, if they try to send it into a bedroom or something like that, there's clothes on the floor, and they get caught up in these tracks. And if there's any type of stairs, they have trouble navigating the stairs. They had an incident here a while back where they had a guy that was holed up in the house after he shot his spouse, and he was laying on the bed, and they sent in this little tracked robot. And the problem was the elevation on their camera was not working at the time. So they couldn't tell when they got in there that he was actually laying on the bed. Now, if they'd had a drone, they could have sent that in there and realized, okay, he's sleeping, he's asleep. And so we can send a team in. So they ended up, filling the place with smoke and all this and spending extra time getting this guy out. And they managed to eventually go in and get him out of there. But and that's another thing that we want to use the UASs for. We've got some minis, DJI minis that we can put the prop shrouds on, and they want to use those for that sort of thing. And they're also looking at some of a different type of, it's called the Brink drone. It's a ruggedized thing that can push open doors and that sort of thing. But mainly, like I say, we want the UASs to help augment the helicopter service. So one of the, other than just our own obstacles of the bureaucracy to try to get this thing started, most departments, they have to overcome that fear of drones from the public, and must gain acceptance and from the public. And that's basically the stage where we are right now. We're almost ready to get started. We've got the drones. We've got the one picture behind me here is a M300 with a HT20 dual camera on it. It's an amazing piece of equipment. And we've got a bunch of other small UAS, and we've just got approval from the city to basically get started. So we're gonna have a media day here pretty soon, and then right now we're waiting for personnel to go ahead and put out the announcement throughout the department for UAS pilot for UAS pilots, officers to come in, and we're hoping to get at least 4 so we can start a squad and do like 2 crews. We can have them work staggered days off, so we have like a 7-day coverage. But right now it'd just be day operations, and maybe if we can prove that this concept works and get approval from, maybe we can get more personnel, we could extend the night operations. But right now that's pretty much where we stand. We're looking for officers who have an aviation mindset. We don't want just guys that think, hey, this is a cool thing to do. Let me transfer out to the UAS unit and do this. We want guys that are serious about safety because we've got to do this right, and we realize we have to do it right. And so that's basically where we are right now, and really excited about it. I think it's going to work, and it's like I say, it's exciting to be involved in it. I was hoping to do it when I was still on a department, as a full-time guy, but now I can, as a reserve guy, I can go in when I want to and help out. So it's kind of a fun thing, and I'm really looking forward to getting this program started. I think it's going to be good for the department and good for the city, good for the citizens, and we're not going to use it for surveillances, and we're not going to arm our machines or anything like that. It's strictly forbidden. That's in our SOP that we can't do that. So anyway, Scott, that's pretty much all I have, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Well, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our next panelist, and this will be from the energy industry. And Nate Roby is the manager currently of UAS systems for federal, state, and local regulations and expanding the use of drones at Dominion Energy in Virginia. They are a multi-state organization, as I understand, and they began using UAS in about 2015 with a focus on the transmission infrastructure just in Virginia. The program has since really grown across all operating segments: power generation, power delivery, renewables, the gas infrastructure, and in Dominion's 16-state footprint now. So Nate's aviation experience spans really from forward air control in the U.S. Air Force to airport operations and in the both military and civilian sector. He controlled manned and unmanned aircraft, and prior to Dominion, he was an aeronautical operations manager at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and was really responsible for ensuring safe, high-volume operations with a Part 139 certificated airport. Nate serves on the UAS, the Unmanned Systems Association of Virginia on their board of directors, and on the board of advisors for the Virginia Unmanned Systems at the Center for Innovative Technology. Nate, if you could please turn your camera on, and you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Scott. And first, just want to say thank you to HAI and Scott yourself for allowing me the opportunity to talk about what we have going on here for Dominion Energy. If you can move to the next slide, please. So much like Scott said, the Dominion operational footprint right now is 16 states. We're using drones in all operational segments right now. So power generation, we have nuclear as well as other power generating facilities such as hydro, where we're using not only drones internally for indoor inspections, but also externally for things such as mapping, surveying, as well as other maintenance inspections. On the renewable side of the house with our solar fleet, as well as our wind operations, we're looking at items such as vegetation or solar panel health and monitoring, as well as blade inspections for the wind. On the power delivery side, with electric transmission and electric distribution, we're looking at right-of-way inspections, vegetation, pole and structure inspections, as well as components such as insulators. And then the gas side of the house with our gas distribution, what we have for inspections right-of-way with vegetation, and the most recent is various sensors, or testing out various sensors for methane detection. So what we have is a little bit of a mix. We have external vendors providing drone services to us, as well as we have the capabilities of our internal fleet. So we have Dominion employees that carry the Part 107 certificate, fully trained, and they have UAS as part of their arsenal for tools that they use on a daily basis. So why have we incorporated drones into our operation? Well, really the main key here is increase operational safety, and then also increase our efficiency as well for our inspections. So we've really incorporated this technology, and we're using it in areas where we wouldn't normally use manned aerial assets. Rather than scaffolding or a bucket truck, the UAS can be easily deployed in the field. It's something that our field technicians have a great use for. And once we get it into their hands, we're seeing multiple use cases come from them fairly quickly. So it also helps to reduce the cost of our inspections, like I said, rather than erecting scaffolding, renting a crane, or even on the manned side of the house with operational costs for launching an aircraft or manned aircraft. A lot of the challenges that we're running into right now is certainly proving out the technology, also waiting for the sensors to be at a size where they are easily mounted on some of the small UAS systems. Methane detection, like I talked about, was certainly the most recent one, where now those sensors are able to be flown with an unmanned asset. And then also just proving out the technology to ensure it's finding exactly what we want during all the various inspections. And then, certainly with this technology, some people get excited very quickly. And it was touched on in one of the other previous presentations there where, it's the latest and greatest, but is it necessarily the right technology for the job? And so that's, something that we're discussing on a daily basis where, yes, this is great. It's the new shiny object, but is it really going to get the job done? So those different proof of concepts that we've talked about are certainly something that, we're not necessarily trying to oversell what UAS can do. Regulations on the regulatory side of the house, certainly the FAA, we're working with Beyond Line of Sight with Virginia Tech, as well as the FAA on their Beyond project, a spinoff from their IPP or the Integrated Pilot Project. And certainly once regulations get in our favor, meaning, you can operate beyond visual line of sight. There's some night regulations that have been going pretty well with some new recent rule changes, but that's when you'll see the most efficient use of UAS once we start flying beyond visual line of sight. Until then, there are great efficiencies with this tool. You're able to get different aspects or different angles of an inspection where you would, if you were to normally use a manned aerial asset, you may not be able to get these different angles, or it was part of your past inspection routine where you would launch or not necessarily launch, but you would erect scaffolding on a bucket truck, and it led to multiple days before you were able to get up and see those different areas where you're looking to inspect, where now you can get up there in a fairly short amount of time. So that's all I have, Scott. I'm looking to kick it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nate, for those insights. Those were excellent examples as well. Much appreciated. So our next panelist is Tombow Jones. Tombow is the new director, just got promoted into the directorship of the Virginia Tech Mid-Atlantic Aviation Partnership. And he oversees a growing portfolio of major federal drone integrations, or integration initiatives, I should say, and technical research projects. He joined MAP in 2017, following more than a decade in progressively larger leadership roles in the U.S. Coast Guard, where he served as a sector chief for administration and logistics. He was an aviation operations officer and chief pilot. And he also was the manager of the safety management systems. He was a standardization instructor. He developed extensive expertise in managing and mitigating risk in advanced aviation. Before the Coast Guard, Tombow had decorated service for 12 years in the U.S. Army and holds an airline transport pilot and flight instructor certification with helicopter and instrument rating as well as remote pilot and airplane ratings. So Tombow, if you could turn your camera on, please, and you have the floor.
Thanks, Scott. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So here at Virginia Tech's Mid-Atlantic Aviation Partnership, we are employees of Virginia Tech. We are a designated FAA UAS test site, and that charge came to us designation came in 2013, and it came along with the mission of being responsible for research to support the safe integration of drones or UAS into the national airspace system. So all the work we do here are focused on that initiative. There's also the Beyond program that we're a partner in. Nate Roby's already mentioned it a little bit. That's similar to the same mission we have as a test site, but it is focused more specifically on the safe integration through beyond visual line of sight. So working to conduct research and help inform the FAA on how do we get to beyond visual line of sight operations is a regular practice through safe rulemaking. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Scott. Okay, thanks. So we have a few research projects that we've worked on and partners that we work with. Specifically, these two are under the Beyond program that are examples of operations that are, traditionally might have been done by helicopter or are still done by helicopter, that we have drones that are starting to conduct some of this work. Proud of our partnership with Dominion Energy, both in the Integration Pilot Program and Beyond program. And Nate's already spoken quite a bit to that, so I won't dive deeper into that. But there's a lot of great research going on there to try to advance the different energy missions that these drones can conduct. What I do want to talk about a little bit is our Part 135 operations. So Wing is an OEM that's focused on package delivery, and we supported through research their efforts in achieving the first Part 135 certificate for a drone, and it was specifically to conduct package delivery operations. And that was in early 2019 when we were able to achieve that. And since that time, we have been Wing has been regularly conducting operations in Virginia Tech's backyard, delivering packages in the Christiansburg, Virginia area. Why, delivering packages is not necessarily a traditional helicopter operation, but I will say that the reason it's important is it's kind of developed the pathway for a UAS to be able to achieve a Part 135 operation, and is really helping enable the process for future Part 135 certificates. Examples might include, parts delivery to oil rigs offshore, which would be very much a traditional helicopter operation, or even organ donation deliveries between between ambulatory sites that are traditionally done by helicopters. So these are things in the future likely would be able to be done much more efficiently by a drone. And the research today has kind of helped determine what the right process is for a drone to achieve that Part 135 certification. Next slide, Scott. So right now we're really in the crawl stage. I just talked about the Part 135 operations being, right now they're very limited in a small scale, if you will. And Nate Roby already referred to some of the efforts that are going on the Dominion Energy effort with drones, and how there's just really a large opportunity in the future for that to open up when we can get to a particular space, both to be able to do this in a safe manner and for the regulatory environment to support it. At Virginia Tech, we focused really hard on researching and trying to enable beyond visual line of sight operations. We recognize that there are three major supporting elements to be able to safely conduct beyond visual line of sight operations, and all of our research is focused on that. You can see our three-legged stool there that shows that each of these are needed to be able to conduct these type operations. Operations over people. We've worked a lot of research on trying to achieve this and have done so through waivers, but recently, as probably many folks on this call are aware of, but in case you're not, the FAA has moved to a rule for operations over people, which is very helpful. And it's going to not just enable operations over people, but will enable beyond visual line of sight operations. Command and control. It's become clear through research that licensed spectrum is going to be needed for UAS to really enable efficient operations that are beyond visual line of sight. The FAA's recently released a report that talks about the type of license frequencies that are likely to be able to be utilized, but that pathway is not clear yet. That's research that we're working on to help support. And then detect and avoid. So done a lot of work in this area. The thing to understand is that just like we helicopter operators have the requirement under 91-113 to see and avoid other aircraft at all times, the drone operators have the same requirement, which is, you can see there's 14 CFR 107-37, and they're required to give way to other aircraft. And so how do you do that safely and efficiently when you're downrange? Those are the type research projects that we're working on. And why this is important is because, you know, the drone operations that we're seeing today are just barely scratching the surface in being able to efficiently conduct operations because they're almost all line of sight operations. As the research continues to be conducted and we start to get to a place where we can have established standards and be able to leverage those standards for rulemaking, we'll be in a place where drone operations that are conducted in areas that were typically reserved only for helicopters are really going to open up. And we're going to see much more, a greater gained efficiency of operations by utilizing drones. And thanks, Scott.
Thank you, Tombow. Much appreciated. That was a great roll-up of what we've seen so far and to kind of add those extra considerations. So thank you. So for our next panelist, we have Jonathan Daniels from Praxis Aerospace. So Jonathan is obviously a performance-driven professional of unmanned systems, or UXS, in all sorts of fashion, and innovator. He is a serial entrepreneur, a consultant, scholar practitioner, and research roboticist. Hopefully I got all those right, Jonathan. So John is retired from the U.S. Army. He retired in 2012 after 23 years of combined service in enlisted and officer ranks. He's highly experienced in international coordination and technical business skills. And Mr. Daniels is a cleared advisor for the Industry Trade Advisory Committee on Aerospace Equipment, ITAC-1, under the U.S. Department of Commerce and the Office of Trade Office of the Trade Representative. I have to say that right. An internationally recognized industry expert, he's received the ASTM Award of Merit and title of Fellow ASTM, or FAST-M. He is a FAA designated airworthiness representative, DAR-F, and that is for unmanned aircraft systems. So Jonathan, if you would please turn your camera on and you have the floor.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Scott, for that introduction. If we can go jump in the next slide. All right. So I love going last because I get to wrap everything up. And I think there's a couple of big things that we're talking about, not the least of which is that there's a lot of helicopter operator strengths that are sometimes forgotten. Big one being the maintenance and understanding of maintenance. A lot of the challenges we've run into over the last 20 years or so has been tied into the idea that maintenance doesn't apply and that aviation maintenance doesn't work. The reason I chose the picture on the right is that very few people understand or realize that Norma Jean, who became Marilyn Monroe, was first discovered working as a drone repair person in one of the largest factories manufacturing drones during World War II. Denny Drone put out about 12,000 active drones that were flying throughout World War II. And they did so based on at the time, a very strong aviation mentality. And that's the sort of thing that we can tap into. So we've kind of forgotten that voodoo institutional knowledge, and we're trying to bring that back, now. So that is one of the big advantages. Second piece is external loads. As we start looking at things that UAS can actually do, external loads becomes a very popular concept. And that's something that helicopter operators have so much experience in we've done long lines, we've flown them. It's what we do. And again, as people are learning how to do that, this is just like getting a new helicopter or going from, a European model to a US model or vice versa. There's some things you have to adjust for, but you're now building up this larger system. And a lot of the things that UAS want to be used for, we currently do as 133 operators. Operational control center, same idea, is that, being the nature that I think it's something like of the 5,000 plus heliports, only 6 of them have their own control tower and are public use. We're used to operating our own centers and our own facilities. And that is something very, very useful for UAS and integrating that, because we have that flight following answer, we have that oversight answer. And these are all things that are sometimes neglected, not well understood as a strength for moving in the industry. It is not just the big cargo carriers who are eligible to really benefit from UAS integration. All these other little things that we do are perfect for that. And the last is, we talked about flight following and the AWC HEMS and the weather answers. We're used to being the, as a former helicopter pilot myself, right? We're used to being the unloved redheaded stepchildren and having to figure out our own ways to make things work, where the 121 carriers and the Part 139 airports have things, that are funded and all the neat Gucci widgets that allow them to do what we do. And we've had to look at our own ways to do there, which is really where UAS is. So it's a very great mentality and culture for us to move into. Next slide, please. Right, regarding public safety, again, I really love following the great speakers beforehand because they really tackled a lot of these items. And for me, this is just a reference of, we've seen this a lot, is one of the big challenges for public safety is tactical flight officers, is that you might take someone who is a very good SWAT sergeant or a very good street ground unit, and then you bring them over to tactical flight officers and you run into a challenge where if they fail and if there's, they don't succeed, then that ruins somebody's career. And you may not know that someone has no air sense or that they get airsick until they're actually in a helicopter themselves. Additionally, there's always more slots or more applicants than slots available. So one of the things that has been used in a number of different entities is the idea of, using a UAS volunteer pool to start building up your future tactical flight officers and then eventual pilots, because they have to learn some of the aviation knowledge. They have to pass the test. You can fly them in UAS and see how they react to spatial disorientation and some of the neat things that we all encounter there, and use that for part of the selection so that you only bring the people forward who are able to handle it. And you can see that before their career is in a bad position. Second piece is complacency as a challenge. So I talked earlier about, on the commercial side, is we know maintenance is maintenance. We know these things exist. With public safety and the bouncing back and forth between different operating rules, whether it's the public aircraft or the 107, sometimes a fantastic, perfectly sound and risk-averse pilot will get a hold of the UAS and not think that it's the same type of rigor required. And that becomes a little bit of a problem, and it has to be addressed as a company level or organization level, because 107 is an individual rule, not an organizational rule. It's not an operator rule the way we're used to thinking as operators. And the challenge is that when you have waivers assigned and when someone goes out and fly, unless the organization has in place policies and insurance coverage and labor agreements and everything like that, you may actually find that your officers are the ones who are completely responsible for it, because that is what Part 107 says that a remote pilot command is, and it doesn't get to transfer to the larger entity. So you've got to be very aware of that. And additionally, in some of the earlier days, we had UAS that would be damaged and they would go home to somebody's garage where, hey, I got a drill press or I can do some bondo, and they would fix things up and bring it back to work the next day, not realizing the damage and liability they now brought back to the organization, both on a civil means, but also it jeopardizes in some ways, the larger public safety, whether it's law enforcement or first response requirements, because nobody ever wants to be in court having explained that, we're using something that was repaired by somebody who may not have been a qualified and certified repair person, and that was potentially led to an incident that was now under litigation. So that's a great one. Last one is caveat emptor, right? Buyer beware. And this really impacts public safety. And the challenge there is twofold. One, as we talk about the rule changes and moving forward with the ops over people rule and some of those things that are mentioned, there's a lot of very aggressive marketing towards public safety to the point where some manufacturers have just donated equipment and said, here, use our equipment, and it became very integrated and inculcated into organizations. And then as policy and regulations changed at a national level, they found themselves in a little bit of danger and a little bit of a problem because they could no longer use their system, or they could no longer qualify for certain federal money and federal funding and the grants and those things. And whether it's with training or whether it's with equipment, be very careful about what you're getting. If you're getting a really great deal, if you're getting something for free, it's worth a diligent look and a little bit of, let's check this out first. Because if you're getting training and it's not certified to ILETA or POST or whatever your state requirements are, you may find yourself in a point where that training doesn't get you where you need to go. And the same thing, if you get a bunch of free equipment, but a very aggressive attorney finds out that you're using a piece of equipment that was imported as a toy, or that the manufacturer has within the terms of use that this is only used personally and recreationally, not for other things, you may find yourself in a little bit of a challenge later on. And those are just things that are worth looking at. It's really tough though when you're looking at a small budget to make those decisions and get in there. But it's something that we've seen more and more and more of, especially in the last few years, as being a problem and challenge. So buyer beware. Next slide, please. And infrastructure, right? So this is a great one for helicopter pilots, simply because, when you look at some of the more dangerous things we do, long line infrastructure inspections are incredibly dangerous. And, I remember dealing with some of the utility companies in the South, talking about how many, the cost of an accident, where those challenges are, and the fun of hanging humans off the edge of skids to bring out cameras and look at things. UAS have the ability to do some of that. And there's a great risk that can be reduced there and a lower cost. The picture I showed right here is from a company called Fulcrum Air, which is expanding into the US, but they've been very successful in Canada putting in bird deflectors. And they do so with a long line system where the robot is completely separate from the aircraft, but it puts these little reflectors on each one of the active wires. And if you compare how that works to doing the same thing with somebody physically on a skid leaning over in a harness, you have a pretty significant difference. So there is a bit of a challenge. Companies that already do that should look at this as a risk because they can't do everything that is done existing. This is a very specific item, but there is a potential to work with companies like Fulcrum or integrate systems like they have to expand the offerings you can do already at a much greater or much reduced cost and greater profit margin, because you're not paying for your $2,000 an hour helicopters and those sort of things. You're doing it in a much smaller realm. So I think that's always worth discussing. Next slide, please. I believe that's.
I think that's it.
Yep, that's great. So I guess the fair point is I like following everybody because one, I get to talk the least and I get to jump right into the discussions and get the questions from there. So this is always fantastic. So thank you very much, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jonathan. Very much appreciated. And that was a great wrap up. Before we dive into the Q&A period, I just want to, on behalf of the panel, say we very much appreciate your participation. Thank you for attending and listening. And panelists, thank you for some great insightful information. Just as a wrap, we kind of gave you the benefits, the limitations or challenges of integration of drones into UAS operations, or helicopter operations rather, and really gave you some fantastic examples of what different entities are experiencing in their path towards making that decision. And hopefully you're now thinking about that more, member or non-member of HAI, and you will carry that forward. We'll be answering some questions here, and just want you to know we'll also provide you contact information as applicable, and again, thank you for your time. Dan, if we could go ahead and start off on the Q&A period, much appreciated. Well, greetings, everybody, and thank you for attending. We'll go ahead and, since everybody's camera is on, we'll go ahead and dive into some questions. We've received a few, and we'll get started right away. So I think, Mark Gibson, this would be a great question for you. Have your customers started asking for drone services, or is this something you have to offer as an option, if you would?
We've had a few customers that have sort of inquired about drone operations and how they may be able to be used a little bit more efficiently. But in all honesty, for the most part, we've gone out and solicited most of the work.
Excellent. And if anybody else has a comment on these, everybody can pile in for sure. A question from Stan, would like a recommendation on a reliable drone with video link in real-time viewing. We won't make recommendations on specific products, as we're not really allowed to do that. However, I'm sure everybody can dive in here, but the key is most all aircraft are going to, small UAS are going to have an onboard camera, and it's a competition for the best resolution, the best capability, most things it can do. Or attach and detach and add different sensors. So the thing that you probably are going to be best served to do is to find and compare the best sensors, especially for, you're asking for search and rescue, survey, firefighting. So that would be something to look at. And I will say that the last few days, Mark Colburn and I have been down at a summit that is a response robot for public safety summit, and it was on a 2,000-acre ranch in the hill country of Texas. And you would not believe how many systems were down there, and then actually being flown, demoed, and obstacles that we could fly, lanes that we could fly to test our own skills and sensors in that type of an application. So look for that. They do that every year about this time. Anybody have any other comments on this?
Hey, Scott, can I make a comment about that?
Please, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, like Scott said, we attended a Airborne Public Safety Association sponsored NIST standard test methods train the trainer course before the actual summit began. And NIST is the national, what is it? The National Institute of Standards and Technology. They write standards, and they work in conjunction with ASTM, and they've come up with a fantastic program, standard test methods for small unmanned aircraft systems. And I just wanted to mention that because the first 2 days, basically they taught us how to build a course. It's called the basic, it's called the, let's see what they call it, the basic proficiency evaluation for remote pilots, the BPERP they call it. And we learned how to fabricate the course. There's 3 sets of buckets, and what you do is you fly these buckets, and what it does is it teaches you how to maneuver the UAS. And I kind of had an epiphany while we were down there. When the first 2 days, like I say, we flew the course, and then we proctored each other on the course. And then the third day, the attendees for the summit arrived, and we started proctoring them through the course. And what I noticed was that in the UAS community, we have a tendency sometimes to rely on the automation of our machines. I mean, they take off by themselves. You can pretty much put them up in the air and just leave them right there, and they'll stay right where they are. And they're real good. You can take them out, you can fly them around and bring them back, and they have auto land capabilities and all this stuff. But when it comes right down to actually shaking the sticks, what I've noticed is sometimes that's not a very fine-tuned skill for a lot of UAS pilots. So this is an excellent course. And you probably can't see it because I've got a background turned on, but maybe Scott can comment a little bit more on it. But I was really impressed with this particular course of instruction, and they have all kinds of other
things incorporated in this too. So where you can evaluate your sensors. They have like five inner rings. So let's say you want to evaluate the difference between one camera and another camera on a drone, set it at a certain height, you read, you get it into a position where you can look into the bucket and see the inner circles. And depending upon how good the camera is, you might be able to see all the way down to the smallest ring inside. And you can use that to compare and evaluate whether you want to buy that drone versus another drone. So it's really like I say, a really good program. Scott, can you have anything to add on that?
I think that pretty much hit it. It's really look at what the sensor is and capabilities and make an assessment based on what you find in the marketplace. And of course, some are going to come with different costs, so buyer beware.
Absolutely.
Another question we have here is the best way of here. Okay, this is probably for Tombow and Jonathan. So experience with non-electric powered drones or hybrid drones, and maybe even Mark Gibson. Do you guys have any experience with those? And then of course, the potential applications thereof. So Tombow, you want to start with that one, or?
Sure, I'll hit on a couple of points of that. We have done some research that has utilized non-electric. The big advantage to non-electric is really endurance, because we're typically talking about, piston-driven gasoline engines that really can fly for long periods of time in comparison. Obviously, it comes with a baggage of hazmat, if you will, and that type challenge. You're usually looking at larger drones in that case, and so sometimes that'll push you out of a 107 environment and into having to operate Part 91 or something of that nature. For the hybrid piece, I'll just mention that that's a very valuable type aircraft to have. I'll just give, Nate's not here, but in our Dominion Energy work, we've looked some at hybrid aircraft because of the advantage to be able to take off vertically in the power line environment and then transition to forward flight and be able to then gain the advantage of that long endurance.
Excellent. Jonathan?
Yeah, actually, to add on that, so a couple of things that what we run into, and we talked about the buyer beware. So most of the reason you only find a 30-minute flight time on some of these drones is because anything with more than 30 minutes runs at the risk of requiring an export license to possess and use, especially if you're crossing borders or have non-US persons involved. All the way up to 1 hour, it doesn't matter, you just have to have a license. So on the electric side, because of the way those are manufactured and marketed, we don't really have that. I'm one of those weird people who very happily goes, yes, all of my experience, 85% of it is not electric, simply because that's where you get endurance and power from. Even when you start looking at, even the larger drones, and not just the 55 pounds, but you can still put a pretty big power engine in a 55-pound drone. And some of the things like from Argentech or Alti that are the vertical takeoff and then they go fly around in their gas engine, that's where it comes from. So the trick to those is really where maintenance comes in again. It's really easy to maintain a battery. You pull it out, put it in. When you start dealing with internal combustion engines and different types of actual transmission gears and things like that, it takes a little bit of a different viewpoint on things. They're also a little louder and all the fun things that we're used to dealing with. So it is a great way to go, and they're very reliable. I mean, that technology is much older than the electric. It also, like I said, it's a little more commonplace, and you can get all the endurance out of it for smaller weight. You just really can't. We can't beat gas yet when it comes down to weight for power. So yeah, those are great. It's funny because right now the type certified aircraft, and sorry, Scott, I'm running on, but the type certified aircraft, most of the ones that are going through for the FAA for the UAS are only electric, and in fact that was a deliberate decision by the FAA to limit it that way. So we've got to be careful about that. We know that's going to be the first round, but really for the things we're talking about, those larger systems, you want to get out of electric power and get into the more traditional power modes.
Excellent. Anyone else a comment on here? Okay, let's go to the next question here. Oscar is asking how common UAS are used for agricultural operations in the US, and I'll say they're very abundant. We have several at the university that we use. There's several products out there on the marketplace that allows you to capture data on a field, on a forest, whatever the case may be, and you can do quite a number of things with that information, to the point of taking the data from the aircraft, plugging it into an automated applicator on the back of a tractor, and imagine having to fertilize a field of 1,000 acres and how much money it would cost to do that. And now you know the health of the field, and specifically the GPS locations of areas in that field that need less application or more application of whatever, pesticides, fertilizer, whatever it may be. And now the tens of thousands of dollars you're saving over a growing season just by being able to use that technology. More and more we see that happening. I live out in where cotton is king in Texas. Don't see a lot of that capability happening because farmers frankly can't afford $100,000 for that type of technology on the back of their John Deere. Up in the Northwest, they're using it for timber harvesting and sensing healths of forests and whatnot. So it is being used, I think, quite a bit. Anybody else have anything to add on that?
I'll just say I was down at the Aviation Agriculture Convention in Savannah down in December, and they talked just like everybody did today about the business model of, when do you use an airplane, when do you use a helicopter, when do you use a UAS? So it really fits into their toolbox of having the right tool for what they're trying to do and the size of the field.
And tying into the last comment that we had about the longevity of a gas engine, I picked up at this conference, I went down to Austin to pick up a drone that we're going to now start integrating. It's a fixed wing, 10-foot wingspan, 3 batteries. Each battery has 4 hours of flight time. So imagine putting a sensor on that and the ability to do agriculture, quite a few other things with that capability, simply using an electronic power system. So pretty good. Okay. Thoughts on full-size autonomous aircraft like the K-MAX. So we as manned aviators, we are always kind of thinking outside the box. And a few years ago, we had, well, I'd say close to 10 years ago, I think the Marine Corps started really utilizing the K-MAX in an autonomous role, mostly for resupply in Afghanistan. And now we're seeing those kits being made available for the K-MAX, and they're being used or will be used as optionally piloted or piloted aircraft, and that testing and utility has been going on for a while, but I don't know to the extent, John or Tombow, are you guys familiar with those being used?
Well, there's a great there's a great video from Cayman Air, right? From the 50s, where they had an autonomous helicopter. And I think in our webinar we did maybe a year and a half ago, we actually talked about that and had the representative there. And it's really great because this is 1958 video of this aircraft, and it's tethered to another one, right? So they're flying together with a rope between the two, and that's how they're doing the flying. One has pilots on board, one doesn't. So there's a lot of experience and things built in there. The technology is there. The question is, how do we get it integrated better? And that's really where the challenge comes down to all of this. It's not the technology fails, it's the fact that, other things happen, right? Life happens, flight happens, and the best plan goes right out the window with an engine failure or a bird strike or something like that. And we're just trying to figure out how to get the technology there. And I think that's the biggest thing we'll see. I do think, however, we'll see some of those more in the rural environments, regional air mobility, and agriculture long before we start seeing it in an urban setting, because they are a little more forgiving to the ground risk.
Absolutely. And I think if you guys remember that first slide that I put on that's showing the UAS capabilities and where we're going, the farther we go down the road, the more advanced the capabilities are going to be, to the point of being able to do autonomous air taxis with urban air mobility, advanced air mobility, package delivery, sizing and scaling up to larger aircraft. If you pay attention to this industry, you can see how fast things are moving, where we, really the biggest thing that's going to hold us back, in my humble opinion, is going to be regulatory aspects. because I think that the research and development will just facilitate us being able to get there fast. Okay, another question we have here. Are lithium batteries just as volatile as fuel? Anybody want to take that on? Tombow?
When they're on fire, yes.
Well, yeah, well, I was going to say when they're on fire, they're actually very, very difficult to put out. Matter of fact, you might as well just, I mean, they're going to burn. The only thing you can do is keep the things around them from burning. But I will tell you that we have a battery bank here that we handle very carefully, obviously, but the technology's gotten to the point where the batteries have computer chips that manage themselves to ensure that they don't get in an unsafe environment. And we've even done a number of tests, intentionally crashing drones with batteries on board, and I've yet to see a fire.
Yeah, the key is having a process in place for an organization where if that battery starts to become deformed, you're not using it anymore, you're disposing of it. Yes, they're expensive, but those things can catch fire in flight, and you don't want to have that happen, obviously. Okay, so another question we have here, Mark Gibson, it's what we do on a daily basis, but you're doing it from the commercial perspective. I think this would be a great question for you. Best way to get your foot in the door operating a remotely piloted aircraft as a career when all their experience is as a manned pilot?
Well, I think as a manned pilot, you've got a certain amount of advantage. Oftentimes, in terms of how to get your foot in the door, really it's probably if you're looking to work for another company, obviously find somebody who's actually providing those services. But I know one of the stumbling blocks that we came in the very beginning was at first, we didn't have anybody on board who already had some sort of unmanned experience. And then we hired a new pilot who was very excited, and he'd been flying radio RC aircraft his entire life. So that sort of kind of got our program going. So I think an established helicopter company that doesn't have that program or doesn't have maybe somebody within their ranks with that type of background, I think that's a perfect opportunity for the company both to start up and then maybe somebody new to come in that's got some of that background.
Excellent.
Sorry.
Yes, please go ahead, John.
Just to follow up on that, right? So there's two great things. We talked about the knowledge you have that you don't realize you have that is useful for UAS, right? And the first one is, there was that recent rule for the pilot database that actually applies to UAS operators as well. So if you've got UAS and you're doing a Part 137 or Part 135 or attempting to get a 133, you still have to follow all of that database requirements. And those are things that we're aware of and are used to. The same thing goes down to ASTRIS, right? Aviation Safety Reporting System is now open to UAS, and that whole safety culture and all those things that we're used to as helicopter pilots is now entering that world as well. So you have experience and expertise there that helps balance out maybe your inexperience with UAS. So don't forget that part.
One of the things that I noticed personally in this summit that I attended, not being a public safety guy by trade, is the amount of folks in there that were non-aviation professionals learning what we do and take for granted quite a bit of time because we have that knowledge ingrained in that experience. And to see where they're at, I'm looking back to the days of learning and going, wow. So it was really interesting to watch that. Okay, a couple more questions. And this, I think everybody could address in a short form here. How much manual operation, manual flight are we doing versus autonomous flight? Programmed operation is what was typed in, but we'll call it autonomous. And how much a market there is for coders and programmers. So kind of a two-function question. You guys pick which one you want to address. I'll just really start off with manual versus autonomous. What's great is there's a middle spot too that you missed, and that is if I'm manually flying the aircraft and I take my hands off the controls in a manned flight, that would be, not a good day, right? However, these aircraft are able to just stick right there with GPS and a whole lot of sensors that we won't get into, but so there is that transition.
they are being used autonomously and manually. So Tombow, it looked like you wanted to jump in first.
Sure, Scott. I'll just say that, yeah, I think that most of the industry is moving towards more autonomous. There are certainly great advantages to manually operated, pilot in the loop, if you will, which is kind of what you were describing, Scott. Whereas some of these systems can be very stable and require a certain amount of proficiency that's not the same level that would be required if it wasn't so autonomous. But most of the research we're seeing as we try to move towards beyond visual line of sight really stresses fully autonomous systems. And that's really necessary as we start moving to a point where you can no longer, associate yourself as being, in the UA, which is something we do when we're flying manually. And as we move to a place where we can no longer see the drone, we're downrange, 2 and 3 miles, being autonomous is going to be very important. And not only that, many of the missions we see require a level of precision that requires autonomy. You think about a mapping mission for agriculture. We were talking about that earlier. Asking somebody to fly that manually would be a huge challenge.
Anybody want to address the coders and programmers question? That's not really our forte on this panel, but
I don't want to steal all the limelight, but I'd love to make a comment about that. At Virginia Tech, we have engineers graduating every day. And when we have opportunities to hire people, the first question we ask is how much coding experience you have, because you show me a drone and I'll show you a coding requirement. Even if it's cost off the shelf, understanding how it works becomes very important in our field of research. And so I think it's very important. Scott?
Yep,
Thanks.
and same thing. So ASTM F38 had their committee meeting this morning, and a lot of the discussion was, bounding software, pedigrees of software, how you set the algorithms up, all those things. The days of, and the idea that we're flying a 12,000-pound airplane with sticks and rudders via remote control, that was 20 years ago. We're not really doing that now. That's not the way it works. It is very automated, and the coding and redundancy of the coding, if you're not familiar with DO178 and you want to get into coding, you need to get familiar with DO178 because that's the requirement. And there's additional things that are growing on there for what they're calling unintended electronic interference, which is the cybersecurity of all these advanced things as well. So it is becoming very important. And just the leap on what Tombow is saying is, yes, that is the new mechanic, right? A&P, avionics, and code. It's coming.
Excellent.
Yeah, Scott, I'll just kind of add on to that in terms of on the operational side, some of the things that we've seen, and I think there's more and more of this coming out, is not so much just the actual autonomous operation of the drone, but for example, structure inspections where the software, oftentimes on the back end, can recognize deficiencies that are pre-programmed in terms of some of the metrics and the algorithms. For example, a cracked blade on a wind turbine, those types of things. I think there's going to be more and more of that probably coming out down the road. And so I think there's a market for programmers on that side of things. And then of course, BVLOS is, like was mentioned, is purely autonomous. So
Exactly. Excellent points, all of you. So now let's talk real briefly about the efficacy of a drone provider supporting an established helicopter operator. We kind of gave examples of those. What would be the most value in partnering with them? And I'll just kick it off with, of course, there has to be a niche, there has to be kind of a relationship, and it needs to be studied and evaluated on, okay, well, where do we apply this capability to the company? Could we pair with a company that does X and has the systems so that when we need it because we can't fly that day, a bird is going through a phase, or the weather is bad, that we can immediately get these guys on board to do it. And I think that's happening across the board. Gentlemen, would you like to comment on this?
yeah, I'll comment on that first, Scott. And I think really it's a matter of necessity. From a helicopter operator standpoint, we don't want to lose business, obviously, and we don't want to really dilute our current manned operations. But as things move forward and as drone technology increases, the people that are looking for that data, whoever they may be, a utility company or whoever they may be, they're going to look at more effective and more efficient cost saving measures. And no matter how you cut it, it's generally, if a drone can do the job, it's going to be a little bit more cost effective. So I think really as a matter of survival, I think it's really important to be competitive. Helicopter operators are going to at least have to look at, okay, what do we do? Is part of what we do, is that something that a unmanned aerial system can do? And if so, then they really need to sort of explore those options down the road. And that's if that's not part of your core business, or you don't really have anybody in your organization that's familiar with UAS operations, that's a perfect opportunity to go out and partner with somebody else.
Yeah, because when you think, great points, Mark, because when you think about, well, I'm a legacy operator and I'm not going to do drones. That's not anything I'm interested in doing. However, I have this capability that I've been doing for years, and now I probably can't do it in one way, shape, or form on a short period of time. So really need to think outside the box of, well, do I want to lose that business? Do I want to just force myself into a dangerous situation anyways and jeopardize the safety of the crew in the aircraft and people on the ground by putting a square peg in a round hole? 56 seconds or 57 seconds to live. Watch it. Okay. Right. So excellent points all around. When thinking about emergencies involving UAS, there's a concern that the vehicle may come down hard. Yes. Would parachutes be an option? Parachutes are an option. Those are available on the marketplace today. And as a matter of fact, the FAA Assure grant, I think there was one a couple of years ago that actually did kinetic energy research with UAS, and that fed the ops over people rule that just came out. So anybody like to address that?
Yeah, Scott, I'll just mention, and JD may want to jump on this more, but there's an ASTM standard. It's 332218 that addresses the parachute system, how it should operate both in an automated function as well as the ability for the pilot to manually deploy it. And that standard has really helped the industry in terms of, manufacturers producing systems that are, if you will, standardized, and that then can be used and leveraged for applications for flight over people. Yeah. JD, I probably stole your thunder there.
No, it's great, and frankly, you guys have the lab that everybody likes to go to, right? With the cannon shooting the drone at the dummies. It's one of those fantastic things. So the reality is that there's two environments we're dealing with. One is the under 400 feet, where you have to get a lot of slowdown and a very reduced rate of descent very, very quickly. And then you have the above 500 feet, which is where traditional aircraft work, and things like the emergency parachute that the Cirrus has and other aircraft have a different impact standard than the smalls. And there's some good reasons behind that, because if you have something under parachute 1,000 feet, you can drift away, and there's some abilities that you can take advantage of. When you're at 100 feet, you don't really have a lot of solution there. So all those things are being looked at. So what I would throw out there as an option, though, is traditionally as helicopter pilots and manned pilots in general, we like to think that the center of the world revolves around the flight deck, right? And the reality is, because when we're in the aircraft, that is the center of the world until you land. When you're dealing with UAS, however, you're already dealing with a deconstructed aircraft and an extended solution. So while parachute sounds like a great idea because of an AI failure, a redundant system that allows a remote pilot to take over from the ground is just as effective, right? Because now you have a controlled flight, you're doing controlled flight to your landing zone. There are other ways that you can build this out. And that overlap of technology where, the GPS auto or the Garmin Autoland, for example, is a great example of this. We're kind of shifting this idea of autonomous control of remote pilots back and forth between traditional aviation and this more advanced aviation. And all of that is part of the idea. The best thing about unmanned aircraft is that you don't have to take off with, everything on board. You can have additional things plugged into it. And I used to laugh, once I started flying drones, I would pick up an aircraft mid-flight and we'd swap crew and they'd go home. And there are plenty of aircraft that I took off and mid-flight was like, it's yours, I'm out. And, handed the controls, stepped out of the shelter and didn't care about it for 8 hours before it came back. So it's a very different mindset than what we're used to with a 2.5-hour bag of gas in a Bell Jet Ranger, right? So, we just have to kind of keep ourselves flexible and fluid and open to that sort of thing.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. So we have one last question. This will be for Mark Colborn. Surrounding cities in Dallas, are there any of them putting together a drone program? And I know you can address the public safety side, but you also have your finger on the pulse with the civil side as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a number of smaller departments around that have started programs, and even in the mid cities area, yeah, a lot of agencies around Dallas Fort Worth have started programs, and it's easier. Like I say, getting back to that bureaucracy thing, the smaller the agency, generally the easier it is to get a program started, and we also have, in conjunction with the North Texas Council of Governments, we have the Public Safety UAS response team. And right now we've got about 85 members. I just joined it here recently. And they provided support at the Denton County COVID site at the Texas Motor Speedway. They also provided support during the initial days down at the Fair Park site in Dallas. And they also flew on the last tornado we had that ripped through the northwest part of Dallas and up across Central Expressway. It did all that extensive damage. So, and the fire department was really impressed with what our group could do as far as mapping and that sort of thing. So it's really taken off. It is really taken off. And what's great about starting our program now, we've got all of this support and all this help, especially from Midlothian and those folks down on the south side of town. They've been doing it for several years now. So we've gotten a lot of help, and it's really been nice to have that resource to tap into.
Awesome.
So,
thank you. Well, before I pass it off to Jim Viola to close us out, I'd just like to thank the panel for you guys really stepping up to the plate and participating. Thank you very much. And again, these gentlemen you see in front of you are all on our working group for HAI for UAS, and it's an honor to serve with them because we really have some great experts, and it seems like more and more are asking to join. I got an email today for 3 more people that want to join. So that's kind of nice. I guess we're doing the right thing, boss. So we'll keep going that direction. But again, thank you everybody for attending. And Jim? Yeah.
First of all, thanks for the panel. I mean, you couldn't have put together a better group here, Scott, that you pulled in from the working group. And again, that's the purpose of the working groups with HAI is to, what's happening in industry, how can we get the industry experts that we have on here today and get them to work with, the legacy guys and understand that this is the future. We got to get ready for it. You got to get ready for the mechanics, the engineers, the coders. I mean, I certainly learned a lot, paying attention the last 2 days prepping for this. So thank you very much. And I appreciate all the hard work that gets on. And there's plenty of volunteers in HI. So thank you very much. Dan, you want to close it out?
You bet you. I'd like to add my appreciation to Scott, to Mark Colborn, to Mark Gibson, Tombow, Jonathan, obviously Jim today as well, and Nate Robbie, who was not able to join us this afternoon. You guys, the information you provided was compelling. It's going to be great to see what the industry does moving forward with this part of the technology that's available. I would invite you to go ahead and turn off your cameras now. Thank you so much for joining us. I will continue with my housekeeping duties here real quick. Hopefully I'll get the right screen up this time. There we go. Save the date. Next week, our webinar is an industry and safety outlook with Heli Offshore. It's going to be a discussion on the state of the industry coming out of a really significant downturn between COVID and the drop in the price of oil. And then also discussing safety efforts in place to reduce accidents when supporting the offshore petroleum exploration and production. It's going to be an interesting webinar with Francois LaSalle, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Heli Offshore. We appreciate his time and we're looking forward to that conversation as well. The Mars helicopter continues to fly. It continues to impress people. If you've not picked up a shirt, a hat, a water bottle, a coffee mug, please visit our HAI store. Obviously, that is the epitome of UAS operations right now. You can't get much more unmanned or remotely piloted than being on a different planet. So it's a great topic to consider for today. Feedback. We will have a survey coming to you. Please take a few minutes and let us know what you thought of today's seminar and what you would like to see us also address. We do pay attention to those. We try to find out what the industry wants to talk about, and we try to find the industry experts to bring in and discuss that as well. If you have something you'd like to know about HAI to know about in general, if there's something that we could do better for the industry, we could do better for you specifically, please let us know that too. Easiest way to address that is send an email to Jim Viola at president@rotor.org with your challenges, your feedback, your comments, your compliments, your complaints. We'll take it all. He does see each one of those, and he does forward those on to staff for action. And that does bring us to a close today. We are grateful that you took the time to join us. We look forward to seeing you next week. Until then, fly safe, be safe, and have a good day.